This is the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. It's a great emulation device, but the thing that everyone wants to know is, how do you get Gamecube to run great on it? And Wii? How do you do it? Is it even possible? Well, I guess it's a good thing you found me, because yes, it is possible, and that's what I'm gonna show you today in this video. Imagine that. Hello there, I'm TechDweeb. How you doing? Thanks for clicking on the video today. This video is all about Gamecube on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. You know what's funny? When the Gamecube was released, it was like the lame system. All the cool kids were into PS2 and Xbox. Nobody cared about the Gamecube back then. I only had one friend with a Gamecube. I only had one friend in total, to be fair. But we were the odd ones out in many ways. But now, years later, in terms of emulation, Gamecube is like the cool system. It's come full circle. Kind of like me, actually. I was a dorky loser in high school, if you can believe that. And now I'm like the coolest guy on YouTube, and probably the world, if we're being honest. Come on now. And I think the reason that GameCube emulation is such a hot topic is really because of the games. The system itself wasn't as powerful as the Xbox or the PS2, but that might have been a good thing, because graphics don't age as well as the games themselves. There's such a huge library of amazing games on the GameCube. All the first-party Nintendo stuff, obviously, but even the third-party GameCube exclusives. And since I never had a GameCube, I'm glad I get to play them through emulation on devices like my Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. Speaking of which, the RP3 Plus is amazing. I said so in my review. I freaking love this thing. $150 and you get a great-looking device with great build quality, an amazing screen, second to none at this price point, really. With all the flexibility of an Android device, you can install custom game launchers, custom emulators, run native Android games, PC streaming, emulate all the old stuff like PS1, the Nintendo 64, upscale Nintendo DS and PSP, and play them perfectly. What more could you possibly want in life? What's that? All that isn't good enough for you? You demand a GameCube and Wii, and you want to upscale them and run them widescreen? Surely that's not going to be possible on such a cheap handheld, right? Wrong. Yeah, this thing can do GameCube and Wii. They both use the same emulator, GameCube and Wii, the DOLPHIN emulator, and the steps to get them running good is the same. So whenever I say GameCube, just let your brain fill in the and Wii part. But yeah, the RP3 Plus can definitely play GameCube great. For the most part. There will be a few GameCube games that don't work so great on this device, and a handful won't be playable at all. But the vast majority will work just fine if you set up the emulators with the best default settings and choose the right settings for each game. So if you want to know how to do that, then I suggest you go find a YouTube video to show you how. Well, that's it from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next... What? You want me to show you how to do that here, right now, in this video? I got stuff to do. I don't have time to teach you how to set up and optimize the RP3 Plus for GameCube. I'm a busy guy. Oh, don't look at me like that with your sad puppy dog eyes. It's not gonna work. No, I'm busy. Go away. Okay, fine. God, fine. Sheesh. I'll get this out of the way right off the start. This video is focused on setting up GameCube to play on the RP3 Plus, but the same principles that I'll explain here will apply to the RP3 Non-Plus, or the RP2 Plus. That could play some GameCube. And since this is all done on Android, these same principles will apply if you're using a different Android-based handheld, or your phone, or whatever. I also need to mention that there's a community spreadsheet that has been made to keep track of which games run good and the best settings to run them at. So if you need to know which settings to choose for a game that you want to play, you can check that out to see if your game has already been added, or if you're a cool guy or girl or a puppy dog, you can test out games and find the best settings and then post them to this spreadsheet to help out the community. Just like with my PSP video, for this video for GameCube and Wii, I made a cheat sheet that you can view and download from my Patreon page. You don't have to pay anything to get it, that's just where I'm hosting it, although you totally can if you want to. I'd love you forever if you did. But it's free to access and download. I made it like as a companion to this video, like a guide to help you choose the best settings and show which settings to mess with when you're trying to find the best settings for performance. It's linked in the description below for you to download and use. Oh, and as a general rule, you'll want to be using the European version of your games because they are usually made to run at 50 Hz, 50 FPS, compared to the North American releases that are meant for 60 FPS, so that'll make it easier to get full speed emulation. I'll get the bad news out of the way first. There will be games that don't work great. I went to hell and back to get a Star Wars Rogue Squadron for the Gamecube to be playable, but it just wasn't gonna happen. Some games are just super hard to emulate. Gamecube will generally play better than Wii because those games are a bit less demanding than Wii games, but both systems do have their games that won't run great. But there are some games that are tricky to emulate that did work fine on the RP3 Plus, and overall, I'm really impressed by the performance. Apart from those rare tricky games, most of the stuff I wanted ran just fine, with very little tinkering required. I'll just remind you to check out the community spreadsheet to see if there's a combination of emulator and settings that someone has figured out to make whatever game you want to play run well. It'll probably save you some headache of trying to figure it out yourself. So let's get into this. GameCube and Wii use the DOLPHIN emulator, but there are many versions of the DOLPHIN emulator. The RP3 Plus comes with 2 versions of DOLPHIN pre-installed. The regular, normal, official DOLPHIN emulator, and the DOLPHIN for handheld version, which I believe is made specifically for retroid products, if I'm not mistaken. However, there are other versions of the DOLPHIN emulator that you can download and install, and each of them has slightly different ways of doing the settings, and they all have different levels of performance for different games. I'm going to suggest that you download and install the MMJR version of the DOLPHIN emulator, because it's the best middle ground between performance and being easy to adjust the settings in-game, in my opinion. You can get this installed by heading to the download page, linked in the description below, and downloading the APK file, and opening the APK file to install it. There are 2 other versions of DOLPHIN that you can install if you want the most flexibility. They're the MMJR2 DOLPHIN build and the Ishiruka DOLPHIN build. I'll link to both of those in the description below, and I'll explain what to use them for at the end, but the vast majority of your DOLPHINing should be in the regular MMJR build. So that's what this guide will focus on. As a first step, let's start out by changing the global settings based on the cheat sheet. To set up the default settings in DOLPHIN, what we need to do is on the main DOLPHIN screen, click this little gear icon up here. This brings us into the settings. So let's go through the categories one at a time, starting with general. I'm not going to take the time to explain what all these settings do, by the way. We have lots to cover, so I'm just going to explain what settings to set and which ones you can tweak for performance. And if you want to know more about what these settings do, because it's actually very interesting to know about this stuff, I'll link to the DOLPHIN wiki page that explains every single setting in the description below. Okay, let's pull up our cheat sheet to help us through this. Again, there's a download link in the description below. Under general, according to the cheat sheet, CPU core set to the ARM64 recompiler. Dual core enabled. We'll leave the clock speed override set to off for now because we'll adjust that in-game later if needed. The clock speed is the same. So let's set that to 60% as a default. Speed limit should be 100%. Sync on skip idle should be off. Fast disk speed off. JIT follow branch on. Enable cheats off. Change disks off. Audio stretching should be on. This is important so that if the game runs slow, the audio doesn't get stuttery. It'll just kind of stretch a little bit. You probably won't even notice it. Audio buffer size should be set to 80. And the audio backend, well, we're going to leave that on open/, and leave the memory size override off for now. Under graphics settings, our cheat sheet says that we need to select Vulkan as the backend. There will be the rare game that doesn't play nice with Vulkan, and you'll need to change this to OpenGL, but I'll explain that later. The integrated Mali G52 graphics processor of the T618 chip has full Vulkan support, so Vulkan's what you want for the vast majority of your games. If you're on a different device, you might need to use OpenGL as the default. Shader compilation mode should be set to asynchronous. And you can change this to synchronous later if your game has issues with like slow asset loading. Compile shaders before starting turned on. Backend multi-threading should definitely be on if you're using Vulkan, and definitely off if you're using OpenGL. For the aspect ratio, this is a personal preference thing. I like to at least try to play all my games in 16:9 widescreen, but some games have graphical issues around the edges because most GameCube games were actually meant for the 4:3 aspect ratio. For some games, you can apply a cheat patch that fixes the graphical glitches. I did that with Metroid, but that's beyond the scope of this video. It's up to you. You can set this on a per game basis, which I'll show you in a bit. Okay, over to the enhancements section. For the most part, the stuff in this menu is meant to enhance the graphics, which means it makes them better, so that most of this stuff will actually hurt performance. So only touch this stuff if your game works great and you want it to look better. According to the cheat sheet, we're going to set the internal resolution to 1.5x native resolution. Yeah, that's right. For the vast majority of GameCube games, we can actually run them upscaled. I found that even 2x resolution is a safe bet. Generally, if the game runs well, it can be upscaled. And if it doesn't, then lowering the resolution won't help much. So it's best to upscale anyways. Just set this at 1.5x and shut up and enjoy it. As for the rest of the stuff on this page, we're just gonna leave it all off. Except for the anisotropic filtering. That can be set to 16x because it doesn't affect performance really at all, as far as I can tell, and it looks better. So turn that on to 16x. And also down here, we'll turn on Force 24-bit color because that also doesn't affect performance. And then at the bottom, we'll turn on the arbitrary bitmap detection, turn on the approximate logic op, and turn on the widescreen hack if you're running at 16:9. Leave this off if you're running at 4:3. And finally, hacks. Oh yeah, we're gonna be hacking, baby. This menu is like the opposite of the enhancements menu, so everything in here is meant to make the games run better. So we're going to enable pretty much everything in here. The cheat sheet says that it's all turned on, except we're gonna set texture cache accuracy to low, and we're gonna disable GPU texture decoding. That option is only for higher end devices or devices with a dedicated GPU, so that will help us here. All the rest of this stuff is set to on. And when you're done choosing your settings, make sure you click the save button up here, and then you'll be good to go. You can start playing some of your games. You'll find that most games work great with these settings. Here's Mario Kart Double Dash. So I started it up and it worked great right away with our optimized default settings. Awesome. I'll show you more games at the end of the video, but spoiler alert, the vast majority of them ran great with these optimized default settings, which is nice because it's easy. Before we move on to the next section, let's take a cat break. Cat break. Cat breaks are my own original idea, by the way, if you're curious. I came up with this concept all on my own. I do them to split up the video and show off my furry friend Hermione. So let's go check on her now. Well, that was nice cat break there. I hope you enjoyed that. So if your game isn't running perfect, then you'll need to start making some adjustments. And now I'll show you how to adjust the performance settings for the game while you're playing it, and which settings you should mess with. When you're in the game, if your performance isn't where you want it to be, this is what you gotta do. We need to open up the in-game settings that we can adjust on the fly. Just swipe down from the top of the screen and click this little button here, whatever it is. It looks like a CPU or something. In here are a bunch of options. You can ignore the top three, they don't affect performance, and ignore the display scale because that's just zoom. So for the rest, there are just 9 options. It doesn't take long to go through 9 options. So all you need to do is find a place in the game where you can wait and watch the FPS in the top left corner of the screen, and then adjust your in-game settings and see what the adjustments do to the FPS. For example, here in Donkey Kong Country Returns, this is a harder game to emulate and it doesn't play nice with our default settings, and we're not running at full speed here. So let's open up that menu and go through the in-game settings. And we'll just start toggling the options one at a time. So skip EFB access from CPU. Let's turn that off and see if it helps our performance. Nope. Okay, so we'll go back to the menu, turn that back on, and then toggle the next one, and then back to the game, see if it affects performance. Just go through the whole list this way. It only takes a minute. If you're lucky, you'll find the perfect combination of checkboxes that make the game run at a smooth FPS and 100% speed. However, if your game still isn't running perfect, there's one more thing that we gotta do in the in-game menu. We need to adjust the emulated CPU clock speed. So if your game isn't running at full speed yet, turn on the override emulated CPU clock speed option, and the actual clock speed that we set in the settings should be at 60%. then go back to the game and see what effect it has. You'll likely need to try multiple values before you find the best one. Super low values like 15 or 20% will make the game all stuttery and glitchy. Even if it says it's running at 100%, you'll see it feels like garbage. But you'll definitely need to go lower than 100% to get better performance. It's not a science, it's an art. Just finesse that clock speed slider until you find the sweet spot. By the way, here in Donkey Kong Country Returns, the magic settings were disable store EFB copies to texture only. With that on, we were getting some visual glitches, and setting the emulated CPU clock speed to 30%. The game isn't running perfectly, but it's pretty good. It's playable. For some games, that's the best you can hope for. But most games will be perfect, or nearly perfect. But there will be some games that don't play nice with some of the other settings, or that need different rendering engines, although that's very rare, or lower resolutions. Or if you have games that run perfect, like Mario Kart, maybe you want to try upscaling the resolution even higher to make it look better. So now I'll show you how to set custom settings that aren't available through the in-game quick settings, if that makes sense. To do that, in the main Dolphin menu, long press on the game, and then click on the Game Settings button. This will create a settings profile just for that game. So if you make changes in here, it won't affect the global default settings for all the games, just this one game. Some of the stuff in here is also shown in the quick menu, so you can adjust it on the fly while you're playing. But some stuff like the resolution, you can't adjust that on the fly. So you need to do it here. The resolution is the main setting that you'll want to adjust on a per game basis in the menu. The vast majority of games will run just fine at 1.5x resolution. Some will need to be bumped down to 1x, although that's pretty rare, I found, and most can actually be upscaled to 2x. Also, some games do not play nice with the widescreen hack. Lots of them do, but some of them don't. They get graphical glitches around the edge of the screen. So you'll have to decide if you want the widescreen hack in your game depending on how it behaves. So do everything that you want to do in here, and then click save, and then that game will now have a custom settings config that is different from the global default settings. I'll take a moment to talk about graphical glitches. Some games will give you a flickering black box. For example, here in Mario Sunshine, you can see this flickering box here in the corner. Most of the time, that'll actually go away on its own after a few minutes. I think it's an artifact of the EFB texture streaming or something. So in Mario Sunshine, it goes away. In Metroid Prime, it goes away. But in some games, it doesn't go away ever. Like in Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. It's flickering like crazy. There is a setting in the quick settings that you can toggle to get rid of that. It's the store EFB copies to texture only option. You can disable that and the artifact goes away, but in many games, disabling that option really hurts the performance. However, I have an answer for this. This type of visual glitch doesn't happen in the OpenGL backend. It's a Vulkan artifact. So for games like this, it's worth trying them in OpenGL, because in OpenGL, we can enable the store EFB copies to texture only option, and it won't have that visual glitch. And in Metal Gear, the game actually runs nearly perfect in OpenGL. There are still some visual glitches, but it's totally playable now. So I wanted to show you this because it's not always a straightforward answer. If you're trying out the in-game quick options and none of them are fixing the glitches or the performance, heading back to the game settings from the game section screen and changing something else like the rendering engine or the resolution, that might be what you need to do. Another thing you can try in there is disabling the fog and the copy filter options. These usually don't help performance and sometimes hurt the visuals, but I've heard that there are some games that benefit from toggling these settings. By the way, this is all the stuff for my cheat sheet that I have marked with an orange color. It's all the stuff that you should try first for performance. And then the stuff that I have marked with a purple color is the stuff that will probably not affect performance, but it's worth fiddling with if you can't get perfect performance otherwise. It's not as complicated as it sounds. It's pretty quick. If you follow my cheat sheet, that should give you some good direction. But if your game still isn't working fine after all that, my last step is your last hope. And it's an annoying one. You have to try a different version of Dolphin. Most games work best on the MMJR Dolphin build. MMJR2 seemed to have some different options, but it didn't give any better performance, except on like one game, if I recall correctly. There were a few games that worked better on the Ishiruka build, and one or two games actually worked best on the Dolphin for handheld that came with the RP3+. I'd only recommend swapping between emulators if you really want to play that game, because it's definitely not ideal. you should just stick with MMJR if your game runs basically okay. But if not, then trying a different build of Dolphin might be what you need to get it working. For example, F-Zero GX was a game that I really wanted to get working. No combination of options would get it running well in MMJR. I tried everything. So I tried MMJR too. And nope, it wasn't running well there. I tried Ishiruka. Nope, same thing, bad performance. None of them got the job done, but Dolphin for handheld actually had it playing really well. Which was surprising because for the vast majority of the games, Dolphin for handheld had worse performance. So I just wanted to show you this to point out that even if you try all the combinations of settings, if you really want to play a game, it's worth going through this step because you might be able to. F-Zero ended up working, but with the occasional stutter, and there were some graphical glitches, but it was actually totally playable. One thing to keep in mind is that each build of Dolphin has slightly different menus and settings organization. Some of them don't let you choose some things during gameplay, for instance. So while the steps I outlined already should still be used, if you're not on MMJR, then just think of them as like a rough guideline. And of course, if you find a hard to emulate game that works well with a certain configuration, a certain combination of settings, a certain emulator, make sure that you post it in the community spreadsheet so that others can benefit from your hard work. And that's it. That's the end of the guide. That's the method I use to find the best settings. It's worked for me, and I've gotten nearly every game I tried working well with a few rare exceptions, and every game that I wanted to work has worked well for me, so I'm happy about that. So now I'll just show you some quick gameplay that I captured of a bunch of games and the settings that I used, and then we'll wrap it up after this.
Ow, my head!
And that brings us to the end. I hope that you found this video useful and helpful and enlightening and tantalizing and captivating and appetizing, as it obviously was. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or requests for future videos, I guess. But what I really want to hear from you down there is, what are your favorite GameCube games? I never had a GameCube. I played it a bit at my friend's house. On emulation, I've played a bunch of the popular games, but I'd love to know some of the hidden gems on this system. You let me know what I need to play in the comments below, please. And while you're down there, tickle the thumbs up button if you like the video, and spank the subscribe button if you haven't yet. This video, like all my videos, is brought to you by the patrons of TechDweeb. They support the channel and help me do the things that I do. It's not much, but every little bit helps, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So thank you. If you'd like to become an official dweeb, please check out the link in the description below. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.